Welcome back for part 2 of the 3.4 swap in the 80s Toyota. So today we're going to be working on getting the engine mounts in the Toyota finish welded, as well as the mounts on the engine. And then after that, we're going to start tearing the engine apart to do the valve cover gaskets and get the engine cleaned up and resealed. Once that's all done, we can start stuffing it back in the Toyota and bolting everything up. So I think we're ready to put the engine back in the Toyota. We have everything resealed on it. We ended up doing the valve covers, the intake, the cam gears up front. We are waiting on a couple parts for the timing, but I want to get this thing put back in, so we're going to start doing that. We also had to swap the tail housing here from the Tacoma 3.4 to the 3.0 tail housing because my adapter plate is for the 3.0 tail housing and it won't work with the 3.4 R150. So we had to swap that, got everything else cleaned up, replaced a couple lines, did some wiring stuff, and then the mounts, we got those welded up in the engine bay here, had a little paint, redid some lines over there for the fuel stuff, cleaned it up a little bit since it's pretty hard to get to once everything is in. And then we also got the engine mounts welded up and in place on the engine. So as far as the engine goes, we are ready to go back in aside from the timing stuff. Those parts hopefully are supposed to show up today, but they're kind of behind. But for now, I think we're gonna go ahead and stuff the engine in there and then we can worry about the timing stuff later. So the way this fuel pump was originally, it had an inline fuel pump mounted on the frame. I'm not really a fan of those. They tend to fail because they overheat or they're close to exhaust. So what we're going to be doing is swapping this over to an in-tank fuel pump. For that, I have a Dishworks 200 pump, and then we're just going to be kind of modifying this fuel pickup to fit the Dishworks pump. And then we'll have an in-tank setup. This is also a bigger fuel pump because I do plan on supercharging this later. So I want to just go ahead and get this swapped out to the bigger fuel pump that we will need for the extra fuel with the blower. So that being said, we're going to work on modifying this pickup tube to fit this fuel pump. I'm not sure how we're going to do it. I'm not a huge fan. I'm really just relying on just this to hold it, but it feels pretty strong. It should be fine. You can swap these tanks out to a later tank that has the EFI setup, but since they're kind of expensive to get the tanks and the pickup tubes and all that, so we're just going to modify this one and make it work for what we need. Also, I want to add, I talked about the fuel tanks that you can swap into these with the EFI pickup setup. If you are interested in doing that to your first gen, I'll put a link down in the comments to those pieces that are kind of difficult to find, and that might make it a little bit easier if you guys are wanting to swap to EFI and you don't want to have to do any kind of custom stuff. You can have just a bolt-in setup. All right, so we're getting close on the fuel tank. We have the fuel pickup pretty much done except for our line there. This is kind of a challenge to do because of the older tank not having a fuel pump in it. The hole is really small in there, and I'm trying to fit a fuel pump and the pickup and the whole assembly through there. The later model tanks have a bigger opening that allow you to fit the fuel pump and everything through there. So it's been kind of tricky. I had to take a grinder and grind out the lip on this to get the opening as big as I could. And this is what I did for the pickup. I cut the bracket off the Tacoma, modified it a little bit, and clamped it onto the tube that goes down with the one that was in there. And then we used a radiator clamp. This is pretty much all I can do because it's as tight as it can get to fit through here. You already have to snake it down and kind of weird. So all we have to do with this is hook up our feed hose there, and then the tube that runs along here is going to be our return. And then over here on the tank, since we're putting a fuel pump in the tank, we need to add electrical wires to go through it. And since there's not enough room on this pickup, we can't add a connector piece. So we're gonna have to drill a hole on the tank somewhere in that spot, and that'll allow the electrical wires to go through it to the fuel pump. Step 1, get yourself a drill and a drill bit. Step 2, drill a hole. Oh geez. Step 3, get yourself a straight drill bit. Okay, back to step 3, get yourself a straight drill bit. So since this is a pretty big hole, you can't really use a 1/2 inch, nor do you really want to with the thinner material. It's better to use one of these types of bits. That way it doesn't catch and tear the thin material. So we'll use this to drill it out until we get to the correct size. So the 3.4 swap in this thing is officially done. It's been about 2 weeks now since we finished it. Been putting a lot of miles on this. We just got done taking it over to Oregon for a big trip. Nothing like breaking in the fresh swap. Then after 40 miles, we just road trip it to Oregon, go do some wheeling, and then drive it home. It did awesome on the trip. I did film that, so stay tuned for those videos. It is a good snow wheeling trip, so you'll probably like that. Anyways, the swap went well. I'm very happy with it. It is running well, and we haven't had any issues, which is a solid win. There is only a couple things that we still need to do on this, and I gotta wait until I get parts. One of those is the charcoal canister here. This came from the wrecked Tacoma, so the tabs on all of it are broke off of it, so I need to get a new one of those, and then I'll be able to hard mount that over in that area. And then over here on the electrical side, once again, the Tacoma was rolled, so it broke all the tabs off of the fuse box here. So I need to find one of those eventually, and then we'll be able to hard mount it, or I might end up making my own brackets for it. So everything is done in this. There is some wiring I want to tidy up, but we'll save that for when we do the cab swap because it'll be easier, and then we'll make the engine bay look all sorts of fancy and whatnot. Other than that, I don't really think there's anything else to do with this thing. It runs awesome. I highly recommend 3.4 swapping these if you are thinking about it. It is well worth it. I have this thing really tucked in there. As you've seen previously in the video, it is like right up against the firewall. I did do some clearancing. So when we do the cap swap, we'll make the clearancing, we'll cut it and make some plates and make it look really nice. I guess one of the other things we need to do is I want to add a fan shroud in here. This does not have one, but the way the engine is sitting, I think we can get the OEM fan shroud for this radiator and it should fit in the right location. I also ended up moving my steering on this, so I had more oil pan clearance. And then I had planned when doing this, since it had a steel oil pan, I would use the self-clearancing method, and we did exactly that on the trip. So we ended up jumping this thing, and the bars came up and self-clearanced and made a little indent in the oil pan, so that is good to go. And then, yeah, I think next up on this thing is going to be the supercharger. Like I said, I originally planned on putting the 3.4 in here and the supercharger, so that's going to be the next video on this thing. Anyways, hopefully I did a decent job covering this. I know there's a bunch of stuff I missed out on this swap, but I did my best. Make sure you stay tuned for the supercharger swap. We'll see, that'll be in the next video. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace.